The weather is dreary today. It's dark, it's raining, it's rotten, but that doesn't matter because today we have an exciting topic to explore. I want to show you how we are going to take this liquid gold, or chicken broth if you want, and turn it into a much more compact form. I'm going to show you how I'm going to transform all these bottles into one small compact form of dehydrated chicken broth. Now, why in the world would you ever bother dehydrating chicken broth when you have it all stored nicely in your jars? Well, exactly. You have it stored in these jars. It takes up a lot of space. So if you're limited on space, that's one advantage to preserving this in a dehydrated state. Also, if you're the type of person who likes to have their broth on the go, whether you're hiking or camping and you like to have a nice warm cup of your chicken broth with you, it's a lot smaller and more convenient to bring with you. All you need to do is heat up your water and you have an instant cup of nice hot broth. Or even add to a dehydrated meal to give it that much more flavor. Another reason why it's a good idea to dehydrate your own broth is, I don't know if you had a look at any of the labels of these store-bought bouillons that you can buy, like the cubes or the powders or the liquids, and have a really good look at that ingredient list. I cannot pronounce half of the ingredients in that list, and for me it's a really important reason why I would prefer to make my own. I like to be able to pronounce the foods that I eat. I know that in my chicken broth, there's water, there's onions, there's leeks, there's vegetables. I know exactly what's in this. I was very surprised looking at a label in the grocery store recently to see that there was MSG actually in the ingredient list. So I'd rather not have that ingredient in anything that I'm cooking. And finally, you can use your dehydrated broth in a seasoning, in a soup, and any stews you're making, even to add into meats, just to bring that flavor to the next level. So let's dive in on how to get this done. You're going to see it's a really simple process to do. All you need is time with your dehydrator and a little bit of patience. Now, to dehydrate your chicken broth, you need basic essential equipment. Either a dehydrator, and you can actually do this as well inside of your oven. As long as you're able to bring the temperature of your oven below 200, more to somewhere around 160, 170 degrees Fahrenheit. You can also do this process in your oven. You do not need a dehydrator. I would think it would be safe to say that the dehydrator would be a lot more efficient than having your oven on for extended periods of time. But if you don't have a dehydrator, you can go ahead and use your oven. Now, in your dehydrator, obviously this being in the liquid form, you need trays that kind of look like this. So these trays are often included with a dehydrator that you can use to make a fruit leather. So these are perfect for dehydrating your broth. Now, I unfortunately only have two, so I can only do 2 of these trays at a time. I have tried doing it with a parchment paper, but because of the way my tray is made with this middle section, trying to get a parchment paper to fit over this without tearing it. Anyways, I just couldn't get it to work. So I'm just going to do small batches at a time using these trays. And it's not like dehydrating is a lot of work. You just kind of set it and forget it. When doing this in the oven, you're going to take a kind of cookie sheet and make a little enclosure with a piece of parchment paper. And you're going to put your broth on top of that. Now, don't add more broth than around a cup or a cup and a quarter, because otherwise you just have too much liquid and it doesn't do a better job. So keep your batches small. So now all we have left is to transfer this over to the dehydrator. And a little word of caution, your trays are going to be pretty full with the liquid inside of it, so make sure to put your dehydrator somewhere where you're not going to have to move it around or push it around, because you're going to make a mess with that. So just keep that in mind when setting it up, and start by filling your bottom trays and work your way up instead of trying to lift, especially if your dehydrator is made like mine. So let's get started. Now, this is chicken broth that I have made myself. One of the most important things on dehydrating your chicken broth is that you have to make sure that your chicken broth has no particles in it, so it has to be very, very well strained and also defatted. Otherwise, you risk your end product going bad, not lasting as long as it could. Now, don't mind my huge strainer. I don't have anything smaller. I know my chicken broth is already strained, and I always defat it when I make it. I leave it overnight in the fridge, so the next day I can scrape off all the fat that has kind of solidified at the top of my broth. It's as simple as that. Now all we have to do is plug this in and set the temperature to around 160 degrees Fahrenheit or 71 degrees Celsius, and just let this sit. It's going to take at least 10 to 12 hours. This needs to be bone dry, brittle. You cannot see any moisture in it at all. Otherwise, you risk it going bad once you've got it stored in a dry environment. It's so exciting. Time is up. It's taken around 12 to 14 hours because, like I said, you want to make sure that it's really, really dry, brittle. And I've dehydrated about 5 cups of broth to give me the results of what I have here. And I did do a couple of batches, so I also have some in a bowl. So now let's take a look at these results. So as you see, the color has gotten a lot darker. And that's normal. That's what has to happen. If you remember how it looked like at first, where it was a very light color and the tray was full, you see that there's even some spots here on the tray where there's nothing at all. This is how it dries out normally. And then to remove it from your tray, you're just going to kind of lift it off of the tray. I find sometimes it goes well with a scraper as well to take it out. And it should just like break off like you just saw in pieces and be very dry. So as you can see, this piece here is just like brittle. It's just like breaking and snapping. That's what you're looking for, your dehydrated broth. So here's a nice big piece that broke off. You can really hear it's dry, snapping. So what's next? So what do we do with this dehydrated chicken broth? You can leave it in these big pieces and put it in a airtight container and just leave it like that. Or if you have like a coffee grinder or a food processor or a blender, you can blend it up in a powder, which will make it a little bit easier to transport. So I'm going to put it in a blender to turn it into a powder. My 5 cups of broth has turned into 13 teaspoons of the dehydrated chicken broth. So if you do the math, which I'm not very good at, but if you take your 5 cups, turns into 13 teaspoons. So to reconstitute your dehydrated product into 1 cup of broth, you would need about 2.5 teaspoons of your dehydrated chicken broth to reconstitute into 1 cup of your warm liquid. Now at this point, if you doubt at all how dry your powder is, if it's clumping, there still might be a little bit of moisture in it. So if that's the case, throw it back on your dehydrator, the powder on a tray that you're not going to lose it all. And just to give it that little extra dryness to it, because you don't want this to clump, you don't want this to go bad, because it is chicken broth, right? So we want to make sure that we're being safe. Make sure that you store this in a dry, airtight container like a mason jar with a cover. Even better if you have one of those contraptions where you can pull the air out of your jar, that would be great as well. And even if you want to add a little extra measure of caution, you can even just throw this in the freezer and keep it there for a long-term storage. So I hope I've convinced you to give this a try. And if you do like my content, if you do like what I've created, give it a big thumbs up. Don't be shy, hit that subscribe button, and be sure to check back again soon to see what other content I will have coming out.